One, action.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the August 18th work session of the Croton-Harmon Board of Education. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right. First up in our meeting this evening will be the public hearing, the district-wide safety plan. Before we move to open the hearing, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Walker to speak regarding the safety plan.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening, everybody. As I'm sure everyone who's here this evening knows, the formation and updating of a district-wide and building level safety plan is a requirement of commissioners' regulations and state education law. And I want to just take a moment to thank all of the outstanding experts and passionate and vested stakeholders who were part of.
Just the theme song.
I love it.
I love it.
There we go.
Appropriate. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who's involved in the development and review of these plans, particularly as we see the unfortunate and tragic continuation of school violence throughout our nation. It's imperative and incumbent upon us to make sure that we do our due diligence regularly to these plans, to implementing them. And I want to thank everybody from Paul Schemmer to our building leaders, district leaders, board members, Croton PD, Croton Fire Department, facilities team members, faculty and staff members who are a part of reviewing these, updating them, creating them, and then of course implementing the plans on a drill basis and any time, of course, beyond a drill that those need to be become part of our reality. So in the 30 days that the plan has been posted on our website, I've not received any community questions, but of course happy to hear from the board with any questions or any members of our gathered group here tonight who have any questions and want to take a special moment to thank Paul Schemmer for being here tonight and for your ongoing leadership and support of the safety and security of all of our students, staff members, and visitors. So thank you, sir.
Does anyone on the board have any questions before we move to open the hearing?
I don't have a question, but do have a brief statement as the representative to the district-wide safety committee. I think it just is important to understand that the plan, which is the district plan, was reviewed very extensively with respect to considering things that have happened in Uvalde and things that have happened in other districts throughout the nation, to think about the lessons that we can learn from those events and the way we can make our schools more secure. The other thing that I think we've said in the past, but I think we want to be out there, is this is the district-wide safety plan. And there is a building level safety plan, which for each building, and those are maintained as confidential because they contain information that should not be available to the public about how to deal with incidents of various types will be dealt with. So I guess that's all I want to say, except I know in years past, the board has had the opportunity confidentially to at least look at the building-wide safety plans to get an understanding for ourselves as to what they contain, obviously in a confidential manner. I think that might be useful. I would appreciate that opportunity at some point, whether it's board members going to the district office or having them at a board meeting so that we could review them, which I think we did last year. Yeah.
We'll be happy to make sure that is available.
I would just have a question for Paul. To the extent, out of due diligence, I would just ask if there's a recommendation that you made that the district is not implemented.
Great question, but no. Pretty much everything that was suggested and is considered nationwide best accepted practices or NICEAD mandates is in the plan. And so we've met all those requirements along with a whole lot of others. Like Neil had some great suggestions and we did a ton of work collectively. So no, there was nothing that we suggested that the district chose not to include.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, Recommended action that the Board of Education opens the public hearing for the district-wide safety and emergency management plan.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, the public hearing is now open. Should anyone want to come up?
Name is Ed Riley from Truesdale Drive. I have not read your plan. I hope to do so. What I was concerned with in listening to the village board meetings, which unfortunately I attend frequently, the police department said that only one of the schools was visited regularly by the police department at the invitation of principal, which was a wise move on part of PBC, whereas the other two were not. Now, I personally observed more police activity around the high school than normal, especially around election day, especially when we're picketing the place. But if that is true, perhaps that was part of the anti-police environment. Maybe it was a philosophy of the principal, maybe it was a philosophy of the board, I don't know what it is. But between uniformed police being frequent visitors to the campus, or detectives being frequent visitors to the campus, or whatever other things you set up, and you're right, those are confidential, the exact plans are confidential, but this board, because you're the rubber that meets the road for us citizens, will ultimately be held responsible for everything. So you have oversight over these plans, and I hope in a confidential manner you're exposed to them. The second thing is that one of the common denominators in most of these school shootings was the lack of proper approach to discipline. You hate that word, but I know it's discipline of students, especially the Florida one, and it was incredible. And the kid in Buffalo was incredible. And the poor policy of discipline in the schools regarding those two individuals. And then in almost every instance, the connection with drug abuse by that person, or the excessive use of prescription drugs. And these seem to go hand in hand. It goes hand in hand with another safety problem for the students, which is over medication, whether that be whoever over medicates the kid for whatever reason. So all these things seem, it's not just physical security, it's the proper identification, handling of troubled children, and not denial for whatever reason, whether it be a political reason, ideological reason, whatever it is, for the safety of the rest of the kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Red. Do you have any other members of the public who would like to speak regarding the safety plan? Recommended action that the Board of Education adjourns the public hearing on the district-wide safety and emergency management plan.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Recommended action, be it resolved after having given the public an opportunity to be heard at a public hearing, the Board of Education hereby adopts the district-wide safety plan, and be it further resolved that the district clerk is directed to file the district-wide safety plan with the Commissioner of Education within 30 days of the adoption, as well as provide a copy to appropriate local law enforcement agencies and the state police.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. We will now move into donations. Recommended action that the Board of Education gratefully accepts a donation in the amount of $200 from Eric Kohler and New York Life as a contribution to the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School General Fund.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor? Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Thank you, Eric, and to all of our donors who take the time to think of our students in our school district. We're very grateful and appreciate your support. We will now move into instructional personnel. The recommended action that the Board of Education rescinds the appointment of Emma Sheehan, 1.0 FTE elementary teacher at the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School.
So moved.
second,
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Recommended action, be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Croton Harmon Union Free School District hereby accepts the resignation of Craig Campanaro as an elementary teacher at the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School, effective August 22nd, 2022, for the purpose of accepting the position of assistant principal at the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School.
So moved. Second.
On the question?
I will just say I wouldn't vote yes unless.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Recommended action. Be it resolved that upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools, the Board of Education hereby appoints Craig Campanaro, who possesses an administrative internship certificate, school building leader, to the position of assistant principal of the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School on a non-tenure bearing basis at a salary of $155,000 prorated, commencing August 22nd, 2022 and ending June 30, 2024, provided Mr. Campanaro maintains his certification and renders satisfactory service to the district. Mr. Campanaro's service while holding his administrative internship certificate, school building leader, will not result in any probationary credit towards tenure. Internship certificates do not qualify an employee for a probationary period leading to a tenured appointment.
So moved.
Second.
On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carried. We are very excited that you are moving into this role.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And if I could just add, it's a privilege to have recommended Craig for this position. You are not only a top flight educator, but a top quality person. And watching you around the rest of the team brings all of us joy. You're just a credit to the entire system, the relationships, the roots that you have in the community are apparent. One of the rare people that when I talk to folks in the community, nobody has a bad word to say about you. Or maybe I'm just talking to the wrong people. And on top of that, you're a Met fan, which I know is strong testament to your character and internal fortitude. So congratulations, Craig. Thrilled to be welcoming you to the team.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations. Recommended action, be it resolved that the Board of Education, upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools, hereby appoints Peter Halligan as a 1.0 FTE elementary teacher, elementary tenure area, at the Carrie E. Tompkins Elementary School at a salary of $77,581, MA Step 5. Mr. Halligan is appointed to a 3-year probationary term as an elementary teacher, commencing on August 30th, 2022, and probationary term ending on August 29th, 2025 in the tenure area of elementary. In order to be eligible for appointment to tenure, said teacher must receive at least 3 APPR ratings of effective or highly effective pursuant to Article 3012D of the Education Law during the 3-year probationary term and may not receive an ineffective rating in final year probation. Mr. Halligan has professional certification in childhood education grades 1 through 6.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Yeah, one question. This is a 3-year probationary period before tenure. And that would be because, question, Mr. Halligan has tenure from his previous.
He does. Yes.
Previous employer.
Yeah, that's right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose, abstain, motion carries. We will now move into the consent agenda. Recommended action of the Board of Education approves all the items on the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
On the question?
Hold on just one second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, so we will now move into the work session portion of our agenda, which is our goal setting discussion. And we're very happy to have our building administrators with us here this evening to take part in that discussion. So I will turn it over to Superintendent Walker.
Thank you again, Sarah. And Craig, well, of course, your family is welcome to stay for discussion of the district's goals and guiding questions. If you need to head home, that's of course fine too. And as always, it's my pleasure to have an opportunity on behalf of the entire team to talk a little bit about our vision for the next multiple years into the future in terms of our direction and goals, and talk a little bit about our impression of how those goals and perhaps guiding questions can help to galvanize and inspire continued growth and enhancement of the already outstanding experience that we provide students here in the district. And just as a bit of a precursor, this is a slide that we use to facilitate some discussion at the January work session where we first broached this topic. It's a much improved version in terms of its aesthetics, thanks to Greg Cavallari. But what it does, I think, is to reinforce kind of the continuity, the relationship between the various goals and the levels within our system that think through that goal setting process, with the Board of Education being the foundational aspect of this, that board governance, board functionality, board goals set the stage and build the foundation for the work on an ongoing basis of the district. Obviously, then we have the relationship and the dynamic between the district's goals, the goals that I have as the superintendent, and the goals that our building leaders and department leaders, directors, and others create in terms of their work over the upcoming school year. And so as we talk about this concept of district goals, the way that we view them is through an aspirational lens. That what we're trying to do is to design goals or language questions to inspire, to galvanize organizational focus and growth, as well as individual focus and growth over the course of the upcoming time. It also provides us on a regular basis a mechanism for discussion, reflection, and assessment in terms of where we are in operationalizing those goals. And as we view it, the operational aspect of it, of these district level goals and priorities, comes through the goals that I create as the superintendent, and that again is that our building leaders and directors create in terms of their goals. And so in addition to kind of the more traditional data review and evidence collection that we use as part of envisioning this language and this direction, I wanted to share just some of the other evidence and information and data that our team used in thinking these through and formulating this broad direction. So of course, informal interactions and discussions throughout the year, that's probably the most important, not probably, that is the most important evidence and data that we use to formulate the vision for where we want to head. Discussions with, of course, this group, with this team, the board. Thought exchange feedback has been very helpful for us in formulating where we need to be focusing our efforts in the time to come, as well as our participation in Learning 2025 and the opportunity that we had as a larger team to spend some time in Washington, D.C. at the beginning of the summer, and to hear from Bill Daggett and have some great discussions as a team about our vision that's resulted from that. Input from the entire administrative team, review of student surveys, whether it's the senior exit survey or postgraduate survey, has been very valuable for us, as well as discussions with Dr. Judy Wilson, our strategic planning facilitator, in terms of how this work aligns with and can support and enhance the direction that will be set out as we develop our strategic plan into the fall and into the winter. And so want to give credit to Nicole, who at our early summer retreat, as we were discussing this topic, shared the concept of perhaps envisioning district goals as pursuit of the answers to guiding and important questions rather than affirmative statements. And so after she shared some thinking around that, I think it got several of us considering that concept. And as we did a lot of reading about how private businesses and other companies who look to support cultures and create cultures of innovation and of creativity, think through this model, we see several advantages in that concept, in framing this work in the forms of questions, including that it encourages divergent thinking within the system, that of course, the raising of these questions as we think about how to operationalize them, raise new questions in and of themselves. It models for the system, for the students, for the faculty, the value of inquiry, and provides that concept of psychological safety for thoughtful risk-taking within our system, which ends up to be actually part of the language of one of the guiding questions that we're proposing for the board's consideration. So I give great credit to Nicole, as long as the board likes it. If you like that concept, Nicole gets credit. If you don't, I'll take the blame. All right? And so with that kind of as a backdrop, here are the 4 proposed district guiding questions. And you'll note that I didn't, and we didn't in creating these list them as solely and specifically for 2022-23, but just as in general for where we are at this point in the trajectory of our district. Rather than putting a specific time period on this work in this direction, we thought it would be better to keep the time period open to potential adjustment and refinement in the future. So these 4, and I'll go in an order, and then we can talk about each one specifically, but I think probably the broadest and most all-encompassing is that idea of how will our schools develop into a future-driven school system. That language has become very much part of the DNA of our discussions as a leadership team over the past few months, since we've begun our work with Dr. Daggett and spending time with the team at Learning 2025, that concept of future-driven schools and what it is that we envision those to look like operationally, from a facilities perspective, from a teaching and learning perspective, from the entire 360-degree view of the district perspective. We think there's tremendous value in posing that as a guiding question for our system going forward. In addition, we are recommending that we phrase a question around how we will create opportunities for thoughtful risk-taking by students and educators in the pursuit of joy, interest, and passion in our schools. And we chose that language specifically and for a number of reasons. That concept of thoughtful risk-taking, in my opinion, is a critical aspect of how we continue to grow as a system. When you have a system that is as successful as ours is by any measure, it requires educators, board members, administrators, community members to take thoughtful risks in saying we are willing to potentially reconsider and make enhancements in what we do in order to get even better and to broaden that concept, that definition of what a successful school system means beyond the more traditional measures, beyond the test score measures. How do we truly create an environment where everyone who's a part of it has genuine interest, joy, and passion in what it is that they're doing? And so for us, creating that culture of innovation and of thoughtful risk-taking is absolutely worthy of a guiding question and great effort to operationalize that. In addition, one of the areas of feedback that we heard a great deal from our community, particularly as we think about this concept of hopefully post-pandemic teaching and learning. A great number of our parents, both through thought exchanges, through conversations, through meetings, have expressed to us that they have a desire to feel more a part of the work of our schools on a regular basis, to feel more connected to what it is that we're doing in our schools, and that they feel a desire to be more physically present in our schools and at various activities. And so in thinking about that, we phrased a question around how we can promote meaningful connection and engagement with all members of our school community and nurture a supportive environment that actively works through that concept of an equity lens that we know has been a large part of the discussion in the district and a key term in the district. So we thought there was value in continuing that concept into how we make connections with and engagement with our school community and our parents going forward. And finally, the 4th question is posed around a topic that I think we all believe to be incredibly valuable and important as we move forward, and one that we've talked about as a board and leadership team in various settings. And that's how we identify and implement approaches to ensure that we're connecting with and engaging with our families whose first or primary language is other than English. And not only that concept of implementing the approaches, but we think certainly as a first step, we need to be better at identifying what the needs of those families are and how connected they feel to our district and our schools now, what the needs of those families are and how well we're meeting them. And so we've begun some work with a community-wide task force related to that. But beyond that, we think that kind of question specifically at a district level helps to galvanize and focus our resources and our efforts around a topic that is vital for our community as we continue going forward. So I'm happy to share those four proposed guiding questions on behalf of the team and to represent kind of the relationship differently and graphically. Again, that concept of the three questions around at the bottom are interrelated in that, in my mind, they all contribute to that concept of the vision for a future-driven school system. That a future-driven system here creates opportunities for thoughtful risk-taking, promotes meaningful connection and engagement with our school community, and identifies and implements approaches to engage with and connect with our school district's families whose language is primary language other than English. So you'll see kind of a different representation of the aspects of those questions there. And to return to that previous graphic, again, we see the district goals again as being aspirational, perhaps achievable, but not necessarily inherently measurable, but ones that you can regularly share progress on, report progress on, and then get operationalized through my goals as the superintendent and the school and department goals. And you see a potential relationship with the board's goals. It of course doesn't have to be that way, but it would be something that the board might consider if these goals and questions resonate with you. It might be something that the board would consider to develop goals that align with learning about and supporting the direction of those questions. And so in my opinion, considerations and next steps would include that the board would consider goals potentially in alignment with those guiding questions as you go through a process to develop the board's goals for the upcoming time. Then, of course, as an administrative team, we work to develop and implement plans to operationalize the how, right? How do we get to a place where we feel like we're being responsive to those questions? And then as we think about our work session schedule over the next 10 or 11 months, I think it would be an interesting concept to dedicate work session time solely to one of those questions at a time, where we as an administrative team and faculty were able to come in and share work that's currently happening to talk about the how, the operationalization of the response to each one of those questions. And so provides a connection with those questions to the real work of the district in a public way, and then gives us as a team an opportunity to reflect on and assess where we are. Are those questions working in terms of galvanizing action and activity within our system? So happy to share that as a background. I will share for myself that I think this is potentially a wonderful and meaningful step in terms of how we view the priorities and the work of the district. And I think builds a big enough tent that everyone who's a part of this team, regardless of what role you play in the district, I think you can feel like there's work that you do that contributes to the answers to those questions. And to me, that's as important as anything else. I'm happy to open the floor for discussion. And I want to thank the leadership team for being here to lend their thoughts in response to any questions that the board has.
Maybe I can start just to kind of start the conversation by
Is this a
relating.
question or?
This is Omar sent an email to the board officers today, and I'm just going to read it because it might help at least focus some thoughts or some, how this does not necessarily fit within the guiding question, but just to read it. He said, I had a couple of thoughts about the presentation. Could another guiding principle be the role of technology in the goal setting process? For me, it is not only in how the district plans on incorporating technology into pedagogy, but also to start thinking about ensuring there are the right support services for students on how to use technology. If this gets too much into the weeds, well, then maybe not, but that's something to think about. And he also wrote, and it's his, I'm paraphrasing him, that's not me. I'm sure this will come up as we continue the discussion, but another question that comes to mind is what data elements do we need, whether we currently have them or not, to evaluate how well we achieve these goals. So now, one of the things you talked about as a part of the goal process for the district is assessment of how well we perform, whether it's qualitative and subjective or more quantitative or objective. But I just throw that out because I don't want Omar's thoughts to be lost because he's not here. And then I guess beyond that, we can, go to the discussion.
So, since Omar mentioned it in his indirect comments, I too was thinking about how do we know we're done? As a project manager, whenever there's a project, one of the things I'm always concerned about is how do we know we've got there? How do we know we're done? When do we have cake and cookies, right? And so I think that one of the things that needs to go together, I think that the aspirational goals are very good. I think it's also important to figure out, like, sort of the first order of business is then to say, well, how do we know we're accomplishing on them? And what are the intermediate milestones that we can set so that we can celebrate success along the way, rather than just being that's aspirational and then that you don't know that you've got there, right? Whereas if you can have some milestones along the way that say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this other thing, that you can actually know you've gotten past that post, can help to make it more, yes, it makes it more concrete and makes it a little bit less open-ended, but it also creates a sense of urgency, right? And those don't necessarily have to be huge goals. They could be like 2-week sprint kind of things, or a month sprint or a quarter sprint to get something done. Say, well, we're going to get this done in the next quarter. Might be a way to think about that. That's amongst other ways.
Yeah, to me, I think the aspect of this that becomes about how do we measure and how do we display progress is in the goals that I create based on these questions and that the building leaders create. To me, that's the operational side of this. It may be contrary to kind of the view that you just.
I think that's perfectly fair.
The concept of these questions to me means that inherently we're never going to be done, right? There's never, as much as I like cake and cookies, there's, I think we should make sure that there are opportunities along the way where we, as we talked about through work sessions and other opportunities, say, what is it that these questions are doing in terms of impacting the functionality of the system, right? What's the response to these questions through the work of the building leaders, the faculty, and the central administration? But I don't believe in response to any of those questions, there's going to be a time when we say, check, we're done looking at becoming a future.
That's exactly my point.
Yeah.
Is what I'm trying to get at is that I was fully expecting that's what you were going to talk about, that it was going to come out of the building level plans and department level plans. My request is that those get reported back up to us as, and this is what we're doing. These are the 3 domains or whatever were the 3 open questions that we've posed. There's going to be a set of things that are done in service of those goals each planning period, if you will.
And I think
Right.
that, again, that concept of using the work session schedule, I think aligns with that idea that on a regular basis, this team comes in front of the board and says, in response to the direction laid out by this question, here's the work that's happening within our department, within our grade level, within our school. Here's what we anticipate the impact to be, and here's how we think it aligns with the pursuit of an answer to one of those questions.
Yeah.
I think that, in my mind, makes great sense in terms of how we use the board's work session time over the next months and perhaps years to align with this kind of work.
I have something very tangible in terms of success, however. I mean, of the thousands of public school systems in the country right now in Learning 2025, there are about 120 and growing. So when we were down in DC, a lot of those districts were represented. And a handful of them, about 10 or so, were chosen to be lighthouse districts. So being a lighthouse district means that those districts were recognized for the level of innovation within that consortium to have reached a height of noteworthiness. So in my mind, and I think a goal that I think we've discussed is how nice it would be to have a measure of our success of being future driven is to be recognized by a national consortium like Learning 2025 to achieve that status of a lighthouse district. And I think it's definitely within our reach.
I guess this is, thinking historically. We have talked in the district about, over the years, the board has talked about smart goals, right? Basically, you laid out what your goal is and what you're going to do, and then at the end, the key part of it, and I don't remember what the acronym is, but at the end it is, measurable and determined how you've done. This is a somewhat different concept.
Yes.
Okay, that we have to, consider and then embrace, because it's really talking about, because as Steve said, it's aspirational. We're really saying, we can't really sense that in a day, because we don't want to say, I've held 3 meetings. I've brought 4 speakers into the school. I have 3 teachers who have flipped their classroom or whatever.
Those are all hows.
That's
not
right.
whats.
So I think conceptual, if we're able to say, because then we will have the role of looking at the superintendent's goals, how he's achieving, and even in a way we haven't previously, look at the building goals, which are built on these foundational questions, aspirational questions, to see how that's really been actualized in the buildings. And once again, not a bright line, check off a box, but I think it brings us as a board more into understanding what's happening in the schools, which is what I like about it, and having work sessions to a greater degree than perhaps they've been in the past devoted to education, which I know is something that a lot of board members over the years, and my colleagues here, I'm sure, would like. And it allows for that interchange, us as a board to administration, even at the building level. And then all the other things, what Omar talked about in terms of data, and what kind of data collection and analysis would be done by Jared and his group, and how we see all that and how it ties in to our non-purely academic things like athletics and co-curricular. I think it's all of a piece. I like the concept. It's a different way of thinking and seems to be aligned with what John has explained to us as to the thought process for being involved in a future directed school system through Learning 2025. So.
Yes.
But-
Well, and
but-
it doesn't, I think it doesn't abandon, right? You're not abandoning the idea of there being tangible like milestones and things that
No.
are achieved, right? That just becomes operationalized like at the building level, at the superintendent level, at the board level, like what we will set, those will be the kind of, those will be the measurable achievements, I think.
I like that because it allows us at the district level. Don't get me, I like this idea. And the reason I like it is because it allows us at the district level to think more about ways of being. Who do we need to be as board members? Who do we need to be as administrators? Who do we need to be as educators to achieve the concrete goals that we're setting that support, that fit in with these questions that we're asking? If it's so concrete up at the district level, then that kind of shuts off the ways of being conversation a little bit. So I like the idea. It opens up a broader space to work in.
Yeah, and the way that different members of the system view the potential answers to those questions are going to vary widely. And I think that's part of the goal too, is that we get people thinking differently about the work as opposed to if there were district level SMART goals, as you said, I think you forestall the opportunities for innovation. And you also have some really kind of muddled accountability. If we reach those goals, who's responsible for that? And if we don't, who's responsible for that too? To me, this is about, this works as long as we're able to come in front of the board and the community on a regular basis and say, here's the work in the district that's being galvanized by these questions. If we're unable to answer that, that means that the question either hasn't hit on something that we as a system think is a true priority, or we haven't figured out how to operationalize the answer to the question. I don't think either one of those is gonna happen.
Questions, comments?
I like the approach. I think it leaves it open-ended as opposed to issuing a directive. I look forward to aligning our goals with this.
One comment, or yeah, I guess it's more of a comment, is I agree with Anna that I think, this is all, I think I very much like this, right? I think that it touches on a lot of things that are important to the families that I've engaged with and myself. Just in particular on the third question around non-English speaking families, and I think this probably goes to all of the points, but I think it's just crucial that, as we're hearing from families and gathering input from the community, that we as a board, just make all efforts to reach out to that community to be able to understand, right, like what are the elements where our district falls short, like what are the ways in which our district could, what do they wish that they could have in place to better connect to our school community, either in their language or whatever the goals might end up being. And so I think, I can definitely do a lot of conversations with families in Spanish, but I think there's a wide range of languages, right, represented in the community. And I think we just need to hear directly from these families, right? And so figuring out, in board meetings where we're going to be tackling this question in particular, I think it's important that we set up an outreach plan or communication plan to get those folks in the room to hear from them directly, which I know has historically been a goal of the board.
Well, and I think, Theo, that can sort of bring it into one of our board goals. Like, we can talk about that as like, if that's and I think that's a great idea, right? That is something that we've all talked about. How does the board do that outreach, learn from those communities, learn from those community members what they need from the schools, and what we can help work and collaborate with administration. So that can play into a somewhat more operational board goal.
On the committee level, like the
Right.
communications
Yeah.
committee,
Right,
the policy
absolutely.
committee.
Or not on a committee, such as, making sure that we are all attending some of the family events,
Of course.
which I have not done in the past few years, family events for English language learner families, and really getting to interact and have people see us and then be able to communicate with us. And working with Rachel to facilitate that. I think that's, that can be part of our, and I know we're shifting from district goals a little bit to board
Sure.
goals, but they do interact because, part of and I'll just throw in, since we kind of shifted there, that there's a lot of learning, I think, that the board members are gonna have to do, consistent with what we've heard from John last year and from Steve about exactly what, I'll put it, we're getting ourselves into as we really want to become a future directed school district. And so we understand it, we can communicate that, in our speaking, we can understand it from a financial and budgetary perspective when we're gonna have to deal with the budget in a few months. And, so I mean, I think that's another part of our board goal, put that on the list. We don't have a chalkboard here, or something we should be writing down as we used to do.
Soon, coming soon.
Yeah.
Okay,
Stephen, yeah, just in adding to that too, I was wondering if other potential communities who might be struggling to connect with our community, where they fit in. So I'm thinking of the special education community. I'm thinking about families who are struggling economically, right, and have particular challenges.
Mhm.
I know we do a lot of work with those families, but like particularly looking and identifying, effective approaches, right, furthering that, and also academically struggling, right? So
Yeah.
families are struggling with reading and math and your basic academic subjects, where do they fit in really focusing on helping those communities?
Yeah, I very much agree with that. I think that third question around how do we connect with and engage with all members of the community across all segments of the community through that concept of an equity lens, right? Everybody gets what they need. So I would think that as Rachel and others develop their operational goals that are based on that kind of a question, the focus would be within some of those communities. How are we doing now? Right? How do we know how we're doing now? And then what approaches are research-based that we're in a position to try that will help hopefully move the needle in that positive direction. Yeah, so that question, and I want to give Michael credit for drafting a great deal of that language in a really expert way, and Laura adding some commentary and color to it as well. I think that's a really well articulated question that again builds that big tent that everybody, as we think about community engagement, can fit under.
and I would just add that I think even the second item, creating opportunities for thoughtful risk-taking by students in the pursuit of joy, interest, passion. One of the issues that you do have with students who are perhaps economically challenged or academically struggling, special ed is they don't have a lot of joy in what they're doing because they're worried so much. They're afraid of failure. And what we're talking about is trying to create a system where everybody is able to grab onto something and grab onto things that will give them the joy, the interest, the passion. And it may be different for different students. And Mary, I think you're absolutely right.
If I could, I wanted to give our leadership team an opportunity to weigh in with anything that you team want to share relative to these and how these may inform.
Could I ask if anybody wishes
Yeah,
to
come-
join us at the
come join
table?
us.
We're just sitting there in the back. Come. Don't be shy. Don't sit back in the room, be shy.
I don't bet much.
Greg, you were appointed 20 minutes ago. You got drafted.
I'm
on the spot.
I just want to say, Mary, like to the extent that, the way that it was presented, it was kind of the third bubble, like how do we promote meaningful connection and engagement with all members of our school community? When we got to the fourth, that specifically addressed students or families whose primary language is something other than English, I did kind of like say, well, why do we need this? Because if the third bubble is all about reaching everybody, why is this necessary? But I remember a lot of the work that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Stakeholders Committee did, where it was a lot. There was a distinction there. And there's also been a lot of public discussion about reaching the needs and goals of non-English language students. But I had that same initial reaction of like, well, this includes everybody. And I think of like our special needs or special education students and
I agree. I think it should be called out to reach out to the families whose primary language is not English. I absolutely think that should be called out. I like that that's being called out. I just want to make sure we're calling out the other communities too, right? That really do need to be lifted up. Right? So
Anything that the leadership team wants to add?
Just, I'd like to go home, so I'll be quick.
What I really like about what's been proposed here this evening is that it is very respectful and reflective of the work we've done thus far. So this is a natural place for me to be, for our system to be, because we just invested time and thinking in the 5 years of the profile of the graduate. And it brought us to this point where we say, all right, we have these components, we want our kids to develop them, we have these rubrics and these systems that are all aiming this way. So what's in the way? What are the impediments? And it comes to me that it might be thinking that's the impediment. And this changes the way of thinking of that. Because what good is critical thinking skills if you're not in pursuit of something that you're interested in? And the likelihood of a child or a teacher or an administrator utilizing critical thinking and collaborative skills in tandem at the highest level possible is increased and aggrandized when that's in pursuit of an endeavor that you want to pursue and can see the real intangible outcomes there. I would also add that, in the development of our next strategic coherence plan, I think we will have more operationalized or goals that are more tangible built into that.
I would just add that we often talk about multiple entry points when we talk about work with students. And I think what's exciting about this model for me is that anybody can find an entry point into any of these questions, anybody in our system. And I think that's very different than presenting a set of already defined items that we're going to accomplish. And it gives me a real sense of excitement on that opening day to say everybody can figure out what's their entry point into one or more of these, which I think is going to produce a lot of really great work in the upcoming year.
And I would add that I think in so many of the conversations we've had, whether it's in our building or as administrators with teachers, with parents, anything that someone talks about or suggests or brings an idea almost naturally fits into answering one of these questions. And so these questions help us to take ideas and thoughts and anchor them in something that is not so tight and rigid, but also adds opportunities for people to be more creative, more innovative, and not so lockstep. But so much of the conversation is about relationships, connections, student engagement, and all of these questions lend themselves to those conversations that we've already been having. So I think it just perpetuates these meaningful conversations about things that really matter and are meeting the needs of our kids, especially coming off of such a difficult time in history. I think we're really addressing where students are, with the understanding that all of this will lead to children and eventually adults that are more well-rounded, more empathetic, more critical thinkers, more risk takers. So it promotes those things that I think over the past couple of years especially have not felt so free to explore. I think it's very exciting.
To add the other thing that I think kind of connects to particularly what Carrie said is it creates something which is very important for school districts, and particularly this school district, which is treating our staff as professionals and as people who are not going to be told what to do or what to teach, but are going to work together collaboratively within the department or within their school or within vertically between schools to think about what they can do, how they can teach. Obviously, they're going to have to meet the rubrics and the standards and the, they come from the state, but there's a lot of variety in there. And that is what excites me, because I am sure that when you folks talk to your staff and you say, I'm not telling you what to do, let's figure out the best way. What do you want to do? How do you want to do this? It gives excitement, and that then gets connected to students and the students can pick up on it. So I like everything we can do to foster that creativity and foster that risk-taking.
This definitely does give us a K-12 approach.
It opens so many doors. So, we've always prided ourselves in collaborate. There's, set time to collaborate with your team. There's set time to collaborate with your department. But what this does is open doors and provide opportunities for connections that may not have always been there. So, the art teacher might be working more with the Spanish teacher, or the gen ed teacher might be working more with the phys ed teacher. And these are pathways that I think people never even thought to ask if they could explore. And now this provides opportunities for connections between disciplines and connections between teachers and colleagues that just haven't existed before. And again, it's so exciting to think about what's to come.
I'd also like to speak to the data piece. I think it's important to not only focus on the quantitative measures that we're so used to, but we have to be open to and really invest ourselves in qualitative methodologies, such as observations, interviewing kids, interviewing teachers and educators, and really exploring the narrative that surrounds this pursuit. Because as you look at every question, those questions lend themselves to a very important story. And you don't get the story necessarily always from the numbers. And I need to make it very clear that I'm not saying that the numbers are not important. They're part of the picture. But when we couple that with the qualitative pieces that we really can glean from this, it will be very powerful. So I encourage everyone to be open to that. And I'm excited to play a role in collecting that data.
Anyone else? Any thoughts, comments?
Question in terms of timeline. So we are obviously at some point going to be asked to approve district goals, and then we're going to do our goals as a board, and the superintendent will present superintendent's goals. As far as the district goals are concerned, and the phrasing, if you will, if it's going to be phrased in the form that we see here, when do you anticipate a presentation where we will, in essence, be able to adopt or approve?
Well, I don't see any reason why this language then wouldn't be on the board's agenda for September 1st. And in terms of operationalizing it, we have our second summer administrative leadership retreat on Monday. And so the timing works out well in that we're now prepared to spend a good chunk of time on Monday thinking through what do these questions mean in terms of how we envision our creation of our goals as leaders within the system. So I think that the timing works really well, and it also lines up with our community paying attention again after a busy and relaxing summer. Everybody's back, and so the opportunity for us to share this conceptually and otherwise with them aligns perfectly as everybody comes back early in September.
And I think in terms of the board goals, if we can kind of segue into that conversation, I think trying to begin that conversation this evening so we can talk about the things that we think are going to be of particular focus for us this year. Then board development and board officers will kind of combine. And then we can work on really kind of fleshing those out and bringing those back, bringing sort of a articulated set of goals back to the full board for consideration and approval. And while it may not be September 1, I would like to try and get that done by say like the September work session, so we can really think about those. So if we could kind of segue the conversation into thinking about some of the things that, some of the things that we see as priorities for us for this year, and how those either do or do not connect into these guiding questions. Josh?
Well, I was thinking that we probably ought to have a goal that is something along the lines of the board will develop policies and yes, I'm not sure whether policies are the right word, but we'll develop policies and something else that support the critical questions posed in the district's annual goals.
I'd like to see something more specific, than that, not just like,
Yeah,
our goal should be to support the district's goals.
yeah, well, yeah, I know, I agree. I think it does need to be, that's why I'm a little,
So
and that's why it needs to be developed. But it needs to be something that we need to think about what, we don't really know yet exactly what's needed to support these goals.
true, but
Right.
I think we do know some things that we, as a board, will need to focus on this year that can put that definitely relate to, and we can anchor in some of these questions.
Yeah.
So if I can hop in, like,
Yeah.
one of the ones that I've been thinking about is, right, we're working on this facilities plan, right? We're putting together, looking at that facilities plan and that building condition survey and looking to put together, a bond resolution out to our community by the end of the year. Like, that's going to be a very big
Yes.
priority and focus for the board this year. And so how do we anchor that? And I think, sort of that overarching question, how will Croton Harmon Schools develop into a future-driven school system? Very much relates to how do we collectively work to decide what the best plan forward is for our facilities plan that we bring to the community. And then tying into that, there's like a whole sort of subset of things that go along with that. How do we communicate that plan to our community? How do we really tell that story of why it's, why this plan will be so important for the district in the coming years? So that's kind of one that's been bubbling to me as that's a big thing that we need to think about.
Yes.
That's very concrete, and I think it's good, and how do we come up with a facilities plan that matches up with that future-driven school system? It can't be just reactive to the needs that we've had over the past 10 years. It needs to be looking forward to.
But it's also more than that, because it's also a financial responsibility that we
Yes.
as a board have to the
Mhm.
district,
Yes, it
because
is.
we have debt that is retiring, that we need to maintain our financial soundness.
Yeah.
Take on. So there's another component to it. It's not just supporting these board goals. There's another, as a board, we have financial responsibilities that we need to consider outside of what's happening in the district.
And how do we successfully communicate that to the voting community?
While supporting the district.
Right. So yeah, in terms of the wordsmithing, again, like I said, in terms of the thinking about what the specific wording will be, we'll bring that back. We'll take everybody's thoughts and things back to board development. But what are some other things, as we sit here today, knowing sort of what we've got coming in this school year, what do you see as the priorities that we as a board need to focus on, and how do they or do they relate to these questions?
Well, no, I'm sorry, go ahead. Dave.
I'd say one that I mentioned before which is a goal that can be somewhat concrete, is our learning as a board about what this entails. So we are better able to do those other, whether that's going to be through work sessions, certainly, we've already discussed that. Or other activities, whether it is spending some time, kind of talking about things, having teachers come in to, more.
Or retreats, something like that.
Well,
too.
retreats are, if that is something that's an appropriate retreat topic, but readings, books or other material that we might read, having more intensive and targeted school visits so that we can really look at, as board members individually, or one or two, or exactly how, things based on the district goals are being operationalized. So we have a sense, there's a lot of different things that are in there, but that's all, our education.
Sure.
I think this is where also, Theo, what you had spoke about earlier in terms of outreach to our non-English speaking communities, and really spending the time and hearing directly from those families what it is that they need from us as a board and from the district as a whole. I think that's a place where that's something we can put in as well.
Yeah, I agree.
One thing we know, however, is you don't want too many goals.
Yeah.
Right, 3 or 4, but otherwise you don't achieve them. But
Well,
some of them are, they are interconnected.
Yeah.
So, it's a matter of phrasing and a matter of
I mean, I think
noting the
it would
connection.
be worth thinking about all 4 of those goals and thinking about what's the board's role in achieving each of those goals. And then coming up with concrete examples. So like you said, how will we develop into a future driven school system? Our particular goal, and that might be the facilities plan. But then maybe there's another one, or something else that we're focused on this year to support that. But how do what's our role in the other 3? You mentioned outreach, absolutely on the number 4. But what about the other 2? Coming up with concrete goals to support those.
And if I may, I would just suggest in your retreat on Monday to maybe look at the language of future-driven school district, because as that's sent out to the community, that could mean different things to different people. So to have some language there that would be universally understood with regards to what you're trying to achieve,
That's right.
or what question you're trying to answer.
Yeah, I know that's a term that's come from, the Learning 2025, right? So
Yes.
it's like an industry kind of word, but for the average people like us
Yeah.
who have our kids in the school system now, like,
Yes. Yeah.
we want to know what's going to happen
Yeah.
tomorrow. Like, what are we working on now? So I get the idea of thinking forward, right? And that includes the kids of the now, right? In the future, but the future and the now would be good.
yeah, we all know that the educational lingo has a 2-year half-life.
It's great feedback. Thank you.
Any other thoughts in terms of things that you've been thinking about for this year, things that
I guess maybe when we think about the one, the thoughtful risk taking. Like how will we create opportunities for thoughtful risk taking by students and educators in pursuit of joy, interest, passion in our schools? How can the board support that goal? What would be some concrete ways? Other than
I think those
financially
are things
supporting
that,
programs that do that.
as a board, I mean, that's a good goal for us as a board, right there.
Yeah.
Internally to have that, that collaboration and risk taking inside the board to be able to
But I
in
think-
our approach.
I think it's also supporting some of the building level requests regarding providing space for some of that thoughtful risk taking to happen. So
Part of the
that's
facilities.
part of the
Yeah.
facility stuff, yeah, like some of this furniture is,
But so it's also
But I think it can
time.
also relate back to Neil's, board education in terms of, when we do our learning walks throughout the year. Looking at that and looking for evidence of that as we go through our learning walks. Is that something that we kind of focus on as what the learning walks will look like this year?
A couple of years ago, I think we focused on student-centered learning. And so
I'm sorry, student.
student-centered
Student-centered,
learning. So when we did our walks and across, certainly with Michael and perhaps in the other schools as well, going through and say, I want you to see how the teacher is moving around the room, not at the front. You see kids working in groups, you see kids working on different things, at the same time, because that's where they are, but, and they're directing that. But I think here, it's a similar kind of process, but what we're looking for, the evidence during those walks will be different based on what we're embarking on. And that would be good for us to know, but also for us to do some work ahead of time so that we know what we're looking at and thinking about, rather than just nodding our heads and saying, sounds good, sounds good.
I would just offer, not to interrupt the board
Okay.
discussion, but that question in my mind, more than any of the others, is about culture. And school and district culture. So a way potentially to look at it is what is the board's role in creating and enhancing a culture within our schools that is about thoughtful risk taking. And that may be one way that, as you think about whether it's the board's learning in that area or concrete steps in that area, what's the board's role in creating and supporting a thoughtful risk-taking culture? Faculty in particular.
There's another resource, we've talked a couple of times tonight about facilities and space. But the other thing, the other dimension that goes together with space is time. And this is right now, school hours, the way we break the school day up into periods and into time periods has been a pretty fixed thing, which sometimes works to our advantage and to our students' advantages, and sometimes it does not. And that might be another thing to, I don't know if that's necessarily a board goal though, but that might be something to keep in mind as we're starting to think about facility.
Probably certainly a board, it can be a board goal in terms of educating ourselves.
Yes.
Right? Like you all probably have a much deeper understanding of how those things could shift, how they have been for so long and ways that they could be re-envisioned. We probably all need to
In the past,
do a little bit.
required.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we just had a very similar conversation a few weeks ago as an administrative team about schools have always been so regimented with, school buildings, school times, start times, end times, periods, bells, even grade levels or a mix of students. And you know what, if we're looking to change things, looking to change culture, maybe not only space, but maybe time is something we have to look at changing as well.
Yeah, and if I may add, I would venture to say that work into a future-driven school district is going to challenge a lot of people's preconceptions about what school is. And I think that as we do that work, it's going to have to be a collaborative effort from the classroom to the building, to the administrative team, to the Board of Ed, to think about how we bring parents on board and really bring to light the rationale and sensibilities behind what we're doing, and think about how that fits into our things as well.
The world has certainly changed in the last 2.5 years.
Yes.
The perception of what constitutes working hours, what constitutes working space has evolved more in the last 2 years than in the previous 50.
For some, but not for
And that's a very good point. And that ties in with some of the points on the board there,
Yeah.
where for some parts of the community, it has changed a lot. And for some parts of the community, it's exactly as it has been. It's just as
Correct.
regimented as ever. Remember that in many ways, the school day as we know it today evolved out of creating workers who would be effective workers in an industrial society that itself had dedicated shift work specific times of the day when people worked, which was a change in the better part of the 17th century. So.
Look at how much has changed in education since the Industrial Revolution, but yet our buildings are still the same.
Yes.
And our format in which we instruct is
Right.
still primarily the same. Our spacing is the same. So.
Maybe this goes to the kind of discussion on learning that we were doing. I mean, it feels like the board, from the board to the administrators, the schools, the educators, et cetera, will engage in learning to try to get to these like risk-taking strategies that we might want to try to utilize. I guess the thing that I'm trying to home in on is like, what are the sources of information or education that we're getting? So I would just love to see us all really engage in just learning from what's working in other districts, other countries, like particularly with, whether it's in the specific communities that we were talking about, right? Special needs children, like what are schools that are doing that kind of education really well doing? And what can we learn from what they're doing, right? And just like looking at the most innovative stuff that we can find, right? And I feel like that not only teaches us something that we might try, but also just like across the board, I think can get people really excited about what risk-taking is, right? Because it could sound scary to some people, right? Like this the kind of risk taking can be just like, and like a scary concept. But I think if we're exposing people and ourselves to what the results could be by taking these risks, right? And doing something that we've never tried before, I feel like that energy will really aid in the learning and implementation.
So I guess something really concrete to that is you, John, you said at the moment there are 10 lighthouse districts within Learning 2025. I don't know if there are any that are close by. Baldwin. So it might be, for example, connecting with Baldwin and saying, you know, we'd like to come visit. I know that, you know, with, you know, that's, they do that, we've done that on things, perhaps board members go and, you know, take a trip down to Long Island and, you know, see exactly what they've seen, perhaps talk to board members, perhaps talk to building administrators, and, you know, kind of learn what they've got and learn the challenges that they have. I mean, Baldwin is a somewhat different demographic than ours, but, you know, they're facing the desire, as we are, to provide the best possible education. So I mean, I'd be, you know, for that, if that's something to rearrange, it's part of our education. Yep.
You know, something that you said just resonated with me when you said, you know, that taking that risk can be scary. I think as a leader, it's important to create an environment where it's less scary, that it's okay to do these things, and we're going to celebrate the successes as they happen, and you're going to be in an environment where it's okay to take that risk. And then when we all know, especially at the younger ages, kids just mirror and model and watch what adults are doing. And so if we're setting the example that it's okay to take a risk, and it may not be perfect every time, but how do you reflect on that? How do you build on that? How do you grow from that? So to me, it is very much about a culture that you're creating where adults are taking those risks, modeling that for children, and children are growing from that. And that's so important to me as a building leader in that second question is that's all about culture and environment.
And if I can add to that, Karen, I agree 100%. Culturally, once again, from the classroom up to the board, how do we change the mindset of fear of failure? Because risk is scary because you could fail. It's risky. That means, yeah, we love to celebrate successes, but the reality is with risk will come failure. And we have to change the mindset and embrace that failure is the most powerful of all learning tools that we ever experience.
So go ahead, Abby.
I was just gonna say, to go back, not to make an example of you, Theo, but with respect to what you said, the thing that for me resonated was that you said to find what's working and to encourage risk-taking based on success. So I do think that there's a component in all of this that is not just risk for risk-taking sake, but also taking risks to achieve that tangible, you know, next level, which is what we want for our students. So I would just encourage everyone to focus on that and not just risk for risk-taking sake.
Very good point.
One of the things that goes together with effective risk-taking and thoughtful risk-taking is how you do the retrospective look back after you've had a task, you've taken the risk, it's worked, or maybe it didn't work as well as you wanted, and how you do that look back in a way that is forwarding, that's blameless, that's supportive, and is future driven, in that it's forward looking back at, well, this is what we tried, didn't work out exactly as we thought it was going to work out. What do we learn from that? What went well? What do we learn that we want to do that maybe we want to do differently? What do we want to learn that we want to amplify? Right, and that applies to with students. It applies with ourselves as individuals as well. So always I find ways to do that. The retrospective afterwards is always an interesting process.
So that leads to something that Jared said, which is you're talking about an assessment tool, right? Qualitative assessment, tool,
Yes.
not quantitative assessment tool, that is non-judgmental
Mhm.
and is helpful to all of us going forward, which I guess, I don't know if you've had experience in that area or that's, another part of your learning, but it's something that I think, is important for all of us.
Yeah, and maybe that should be part of one of the board goals is to kind of touch on, I think something you said earlier, Josh, too, how do we know we're making progress? Right, as a board, I think that's a role of ours, is just to make sure that these goals are moving forward. And to get the parents to come along, I think we do need to be clear on, what are we trying to achieve and are we achieving it, right? If we're gonna remove a lot of the things that have been done for, a century or whatever, what are we replacing it with, right? We have to speak to that, and we have to say, how are we, what we're doing now, are we making progress? By changing those things, are we making progress in some direction, and what is that direction?
Well, and I think Steve's suggestion that we look at, this coming year and structure, periodic work sessions to dedicate to a single one of these. We can also look to see, okay, so how are we making progress with this? Like, what are we doing in our buildings that are,
Right, and it's probably gonna
that are
take some
going
time.
to- Yeah,
become more
it's not gonna be the September work
Well,
session.
more
But like, yeah,
but more systemic in how we are actually evaluating that, right? 'Cause
Absolutely.
Qualitative is good. But quantitative is also necessary, and if the old quantitative ways of measuring things like standardized testing are gonna be, not as utilized, what are the other ways to really identify that we're making progress, not just from qualitative data that we could pull, and tell a story with, right? And I think as a board, that's really important to work towards, right? In this new environment, right, where we do need to communicate to our community about what we are proposing is going to be done. And not just at that high level, but really how are we making progress?
So that, to me, that kind of rolls in, like, right, the communication aspect of it. I mean, we haven't talked about that sort of explicitly as a board goal, but I think communication of
Yes.
some of these things and of facilities plan of all these things, I think that should maybe be something that we place a particular focus on, like that we do have a goal that's specific to communication. Yeah. We can sort of hash out the details of what that communication is, or how I guess how we measure, right, that we're successful with that.
Yes. Exactly.
But maybe it's outreach days, maybe it's adjusting or changing the way the Black Cow has been into evolving into something that, is better meets the needs of the community. And that we can communicate out.
I think also clearly identifying, like, by pursuing joy, interest, passion, what are we trying to instill in our kids? What is that outcome of what we're looking for, right? Happy, right, well-adjusted, able to provide for themselves. What specifically are we trying to ignite? A lifelong passion for education, which is wonderful. But I think being a little more clear on, like, what outcomes are being proposed by this approach, and then determining if we're making progress in that area based on the changes.
That ties with profile the graduate and
Perhaps that's what I
SCP.
was gonna say. You really, you
A lot of
don't
that's
wanna
already
say,
there, right?
we're done with profile the graduates, we're
Right.
doing this. What you wanna say is, this is a way for us to achieve and enhance what we have focused on as those things that we want the graduate of our school district to come out with. Because if you are passionate, if you have joy, if you have interest in things, you will be a better communicator, a better researcher, a better, all the things that are already inside that head.
Hopefully,
Hopefully.
right, hopefully, but we
Yeah.
should be
And
tracking progress on
and
it,
that's
right?
communication. That's
Yeah.
also because, parents have been told over the years, we focus on the profile of the graduate and so on. And now, well, how does this relate back to what we've been doing and what we've been trying to have our staff, parents and everyone, I'll call it, buy into, because we think it's what is going to be best for kids and why this would be best for kids.
To the extent that we're still discussing board goals, I think that there's a question that we need to ask regarding communication of the board, because we've struggled with like the black cow and how we reach the community, just to model the same way of thinking. There's a big question we have to ask about our communication. I don't know what that question is, but I know there's a question.
Yeah, I know, I agree with you, I agree with you. Because that's, I mean, it's sort of the ultimate, right, goals that we'll never be able to just like check off and be what we're done with.
Yeah.
Communication.
Because it's a
is
constantly moving target on
Right.
top of everything. What we need to communicate is constantly changing, and the needs of the community are evolving as well.
That's true. But we can
Um,
identify some steps.
Do we? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Alright. Well, does anyone have any other thoughts with regard to board goals that you would like for development and to consider? It's gonna make you part of board development. before
So
this
I
is
heard.
Are you on every committee
Sorry,
now?
yeah, just being
Are you on every committee now?
No, she's on everything. Technically. No, just, I guess, because I think probably the way this would work is that
It's
board,
just a joke.
no, that board development would be talked about these initially and then.
Yeah,
board
yeah,
officers
so
would-
board development and board officers, so just, there's.
Hey, whatever.
Just
combine
three
us
of
all.
us.
Good.
Good.
So any other thoughts? And obviously, right, if something comes to you tomorrow or next week, right, you know how to email us. So it's not it's not speak now or forever hold your peace, but
When are the school level goals and superintendent goals? What's the timeline on those?
I can speak only for mine. I think that's the middle of September. So shortly, and I would envision that early in September, the school level goals will be well defined as well.
to that point, does anyone have any other thoughts while we have our administrators here with regard to these district guiding questions or things that they may want to think about as they're beginning to look at their own individual building or superintendent goals that you would like them to think about, consider?
One question I had earlier was about the third or fourth one, on the language question. When I've worked with government agencies and implementing like language access plans, right, they often will have kind of a government-wide plan, and then like each agency will come up with its own plan, right? So similarly, I guess we'd have maybe like a district-wide or district-wide kind of approach to reaching limited English proficient people. And then that, each building would also have its own kind of way of approaching this question. And I guess my question here is, to what extent that has been the case, and to what extent there has been cooperation between the schools, right, in kind of having an approach that is unique to each school, right, and that community's needs, but also creates some commonality so that parents, families, et cetera, know what to expect in any given school. And so, I mean, maybe that's just a thing that we're figuring out continually, but I do think there's that kind of balance you want to strike of having something that you can expect at every school, but that there's also stuff that's unique to the school because of that school's needs, that community's needs. And there's also a question of economies of scale that you can get by just sharing resources, whether it's translation banks or interpreter services or whatever it is. So I just had that kind of like how it's hits the ground now, and then also how the schools kind of foresee improving upon what's already there, right? Striking that balance of commonality and kind of uniqueness by building. Does that make sense?
It does. I'll just start off by saying, I think it has been our practice to really sort of share amongst the building, articulated goals. If you look at something like a curriculum goal, it's probably the best way to sort of give an example. because we might all be working on how we, going back a couple of years, really create meaningful real world problems that will invoke the need for students to develop and utilize critical thinking skills. So that was something that was a goal shared amongst 3 districts. Now, obviously, with 3 different buildings and 3 different developmental levels of children, that's going to have to be done very, very differently. So how a principal and their faculty will take that one district goal and operationalize it for their specific grade levels is going to look very, very different, which I think is the first part of what you were getting.
And to add to that, John, I would say that the mechanism has been well developed in terms of the last strategic coherence plan. Each of the buildings had the common language of our rubrics as well as our profile of the graduate, and yet at every level was able to operationalize that in their building, not just to achieve the goal, but also to look at it in a more nuanced way about how does it impact the needs of the students, all right, at different on the continuum of education. So those kids who have certain needs, those kids who need, more challenging experiences, and those who need remediation or more support, and how that played out at each and every building. So I think that those systems are in place. And I see that our strategic coherence plan that we'll be developing will also, with Dr. Wilson, will also have that same type of effect and help us articulate what are the tangible ways that we can do this in each building.
I do have just one point of feedback with respect to the building level goals. And this is not to put anyone on the spot, but just because of the new house system at CET, I know that there are a lot, as a CET parent, I know there are a lot of parents who have a lot of questions about how the houses are going to be sorted and everything. I would just maybe suggest you take a look at communication regarding how that whole amazing program is going to roll out, and be mindful of constantly conveying that to parents.
Working on it as we.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure you are.
I have a question relative to and feel free to say, I don't know the answer, I'll get back to you on this. How many different languages are we supporting inside of the school district now in terms of ELL students?
I would say that 3 or 4 languages, obviously Spanish being the primary one, but we also, and look, over the past, 15 years, I can look back that far, we've had Chinese, we've had Russian, right, and the occasional Slavic language, like Albanian, but it's primarily Spanish.
I actually have that data from our movement report here that Maria. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 9 different home languages reported for high school students. So it doesn't necessarily
Just for high school.
the kids are, it's the home language report. But the bulk is Spanish.
How many kids?
406 English, and then 72 other languages at home.
That's just high school students.
Just high school students.
Right, so that's about almost 20%. Which doesn't mean that the students are necessarily not at all conversant in English, but just talking about the home language, and therefore and from various different, 9 different languages at high school.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Well, I want to take a second just to thank our administrators for joining us this evening. I thank you for the presentation of these. I think these are exciting things for us as board members and parents and you as educators to think about and be working towards. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how these evolve and how these roll out in our schools. So thank you very much. And I know we'll be hearing much more about them throughout the year, so.
And thank you to the board for a great discussion and for embracing this concept. We're excited to make this real.
All right, well, recommended action that the Board of Education adjourns this meeting at 8:35 PM.
So moved.
Can I get a second? from anyone, or should I
Come on.
do that? Josh, all right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carried. Thank you very much, everyone.
Slow as